Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, Jared Kushner, the billionaire real estate scion shaping Gaza's future.
I don't know exactly what role he's going to play, but obviously he is an important, representative of the president in this situation.
Why the U.S. president's son-in-law is a key figure in Gaza's ceasefire deal, and the future of the Middle East. I'm Natasha Del Toro, and this is The Take. Hi. So before we continue with today's show, remember to leave us a comment letting us know what you think about today's episode and if there's any stories that you would like to see us cover. If you're on the podcast app, let us know where you're listening from and give us a 5-star review so more people can find the show.
I'm Ali Harb. I am a journalist for Al Jazeera English based here in Washington, D.C.
Ali, it's always such a pleasure to have you here on The Take. In the last few days, there's been a lot that has been happening on the Israel-Gaza front. We've seen a prisoner exchange between Israel and Hamas, the return of the captives taken on October 7th. Aid has begun to trickle back into Gaza, finally. And world leaders in Egypt have been discussing Gaza's future. At the center of all of this, even if maybe just outside of the frame, is the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Why don't we remind people, who is Jared Kushner?
On an existential level, that's an everlasting question. Who is Jared Kushner? Because he's always somewhere on the edge of the frame when it comes to Middle East policy and Donald Trump. I think first and foremost, he's the president's son-in-law. He is also the son of a construction tycoon who went to jail for tax evasion and witness tampering. Very interesting story, but for another day. He is the grandson of Holocaust survivors, and he has placed himself at the center of Washington's Middle East policy. Currently, he does not have an official title. So if you're asking what is Jared Kushner's title, there is none. But we know that he's been active in these ceasefire talks, in the plans for the future of Gaza. He's been part of this 20-point proposal that Trump put forward. And President Donald Trump, on Monday, when he spoke to the Knesset, and when he was in Sharm el-Sheikh to finalize and sign the agreement in the ceremony, thanked Jared Kushner for his role in bringing this together.
Jared has been so helpful. He really did something very special.
Now, Ali, Kushner comes from an Orthodox Jewish family, right? Mm-hmm. And he isn't just a staunch supporter of Israel. He's actually very tight with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He would actually stay with the Kushner family and even took Kushner's childhood bedroom. Mm-hmm. And in case there was any doubt about where Kushner's loyalties lie, at a rally in Tel Aviv on Sunday, he said that he was proud of Israel's actions post-October 7th.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of replicating the barbarism of the enemy, you chose to be exceptional. You chose to stand for the values that you stand for. And I couldn't be prouder to be a friend of Israel.
So what was Kushner's actual role in the peace deal negotiations?
Let me just start by saying that it's not uncommon for American officials who work on Israel-Palestine to have a pro-Israel bias. In fact, that's the norm. But in Kushner's case, he's not just pro-Israel. As you mentioned, this is somebody who had Benjamin Netanyahu take his room when he would visit New York. And his family has financial ties to illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank. Now, when it comes to this plan, again, because he's not a government employee, because he doesn't have a title, it's unclear how much he's been involved. He is meeting with former British Prime Minister Tony Blair to formalize this post-war plan for Gaza. And then, he's showing up at White House meetings. And then I think what drove it home that, yes, Jared Kushner is back is when he went to Sharm el-Sheikh to participate in the talks along Steve Witkoff, the actual official envoy for the Middle East. And then subsequently, when he went to Israel and met with Netanyahu along with Witkoff to finalize the final details of the agreements. So he's there and he's involved. It's just the extent of his involvement and in what capacity, those things we do not know.
You know, there have been other proposals that in the last 2 years that have failed. So why do you think that Kushner's involvement turned out to be the linchpin here that actually closed this deal? I mean, was it because he was able to leverage special relationships with people like Benjamin Netanyahu?
We don't want to give Kushner the credit for this deal because there's about 20 or 30 factors that you could talk about as why a ceasefire was agreed now when the parties failed to reach one a year ago, a year and 6 months ago, even 2 years ago when the war started. I think a big element of the ceasefire is that Israel was getting a lot of international pressure. Public opinion was turning. The images of starving kids broke people's hearts across the world. Anyone with any conscience couldn't accept that. And Donald Trump alluded to that when he said, Israel can't fight the world. And then he thanked Benjamin Netanyahu for taking the victory.
We've won, and now let's enjoy our lives and let's rebuild Israel and make it stronger and bigger and better than it's ever been before.
As far as Jared Kushner's involvement comes in, the way I view it, and this is my personal analysis, is through a few lenses. The first of which is that he is a family member of Donald Trump, right? So when he's speaking to the Egyptians, when he's speaking to the Qatari to convey messages to Hamas, when he's speaking to Trump, this is someone that Trump can trust blindly as a family member, not just as a confidant and as an envoy. But he's someone who also has forged relations across the Arab world. So that puts on the table the prospect of further normalization in the region. And as you mentioned, he's someone that the Israelis trust as well. So this is how I view his role. But I wouldn't give him the credit for securing the deal per se.
You know, it's interesting that Kushner and his wife Ivanka, the president's daughter, they were a lot more visible during Trump's first term, right? And then they took this sort of step back from politics. So, Ali, what has Kushner been up to while he's been out of the spotlight?
He wrote a book. That's one thing that he did. Other than that, he's been amassing investments and partnering with various countries in the Gulf, primarily Saudi Arabia. He received $2 billion from Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund to conduct business deal. As the ceasefire deal was being talked about in Gaza, Kushner was involved in another deal, a massive, enormous takeover of EA Sports, one of the largest video gaming companies, in a partnership with the Saudi sovereign wealth fund. He hasn't been entirely out of the picture politically because he's been given his opinion, and he's given some grotesque opinions about Gaza, and we can get to that later.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and I guess one question that comes to mind for me, why would Middle Eastern investors give such an unimaginable amount of money to someone who is unexperienced when it comes to investing and diplomacy for that matter? You know, what's the logic there?
Well, but, somebody may say that he comes from this family of legendary construction tycoons, that he handled the Middle East well, and that he's young and bright, and he's deserving of this investment money. There's a counter argument, which is if he's somebody who's close to Trump, and if you sort of get on his good side, then maybe you are able to effectuate policy. The White House, of course, rejects these claims vehemently.
Mm-hmm. You know, Kushner has significant business interests in the region. In fact, on the same day that he was finalizing the 20-point peace plan for Israel-Gaza, he was facilitating, as you just mentioned, the sale of the American gaming company Electronic Arts to Saudi Arabia for a cool $55 billion, right? This
Pocket
is not
change.
just... pocket change, just extra money that somebody has lying around. Now, this is not just the biggest deal of Kushner's life. This is literally the biggest buyout ever of a publicly traded company. So, you mentioned the White House. When a reporter asked White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt about potential conflicts of interest here, she said that Kushner should be lauded for working so hard to bring peace to the world.
I think it's, frankly, despicable that you're trying to suggest that it's inappropriate for Jared Kushner, who is widely respected around the world and has great trust in relationships with these critical partners in these countries, to strike a 20-point comprehensive detailed peace plan.
Ali, what are those conflicts of interest? What are the hazards of mixing deals with international diplomacy?
Well, we've seen what happened with the former president's son, Hunter Biden, when he was appointed to the board of a Ukrainian oil company, and that was universally rejected. And his standing and the president's standing, then president's standing, were brought into question. That the president's son is compromised, and how could you pursue policy in an unbiased way that puts the United States national interests first when you're involved in all of these business deals with countries that may have their own interests that could clash with American interests or could directly contradict American interests? So where do your loyalties go? With your business partners or with the administration that you're serving? Albeit, to add more to the ambiguity and to the potential conflict of interests, as I mentioned, Jared Kushner doesn't even have a title. So it's not like, when you're a federal employee, you have to go through screenings, you have to go through disclosure of, finances. He's not doing any of this because he's not even an official advisor or employee of the federal government. So there are concerns, especially when it's the same exact person closing different deals. One's in personal capacity and one's on behalf of the American government.
More with Ali after the break.
Up to 100,000 children go missing in China every year, a number that links back to the 1970s and the one-child policy. This story is about one of those children and the mother who spent decades searching for him. What's happening to China's children? Hear the full story on True Crime Reports.
Ali, Jared Kushner was an unpaid advisor to President Trump during his first term in office from 2017 to 2021. And it was during that time that he took a particular interest in coming up with an Israeli-Palestinian peace plan. Mm-hmm. What he came up with was something called, or that he called, the deal of the century. What was the deal of the century, and how does it illustrate Kushner's approach to policy?
So Donald Trump, when he was running first in 2015, going back 10 years ago, he promoted himself, and still does, as this deal maker and, what's the most complex conflict in the world that everyone cares about? It's Israel-Palestine. So he wanted to bring this conflict to an end, and he taps his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who has never been involved in international relations, has no training as a foreign diplomat, has never been an officer of the State Department. And the credentials were that he's gone to Harvard, I think, to study business. But it raised a lot of eyebrows. What makes Jared Kushner uniquely qualified to solve a conflict that has not been solved since 1948?
It's a fair question.
And it was answered soon when he presented the so-called deal of the century. And the deal of the century basically stipulated that Palestinians would give up all of their rights to sovereignty, all of their aspirations to statehood, and they would be nominally given a state, quote unquote, like triple quotation marks around the word state. And it's basically a collection of islands outside of areas in the occupied West Bank that have not been annexed by Israel, that would be connected in his vision through tunnels or bridges, not to disturb the illegal Israeli settlers around. And we call that a state. And in return, the Palestinians would get $50 billion in investments over 10 years. Basically, what he was offering in no unambiguous terms is buying out the Palestinian cause. Hey, Palestinians, you sell your cause, you sell your dreams and your legitimate aspirations for self-determination, and we'll give you $50 billion. Not the United States, because in his vision, the Arab world and other donors would pay this $50 billion. And this sort of sums up how Kushner views the world. Things are for sale, borders are not sacred, hence the sort of motto of the deal of the century. And the broader Trump approach to the region, which, by the way, was adopted later by Biden, in part, was peace to prosperity. Not peace to freedom, not peace to self-determination, not peace to human rights, peace to prosperity. What matters is prosperity, investments, money, generating capital, selling stuff. And needless to say, deal of the century was that on arrival.
And everything you were describing reminds me of, in an interview with Al Jazeera at the time, he dismissed some of the things that Palestinians have been demanding as, quote, myths and fairy tales.
The Palestinian people are on a terrible trajectory thanks to a lot of bad decisions by their leadership. They have to stop holding out for myths that will never come and fairy tales that will never come.
Simply because you say Palestinian refugees are a myth, 5 million people don't just disappear, right? Simply because you say, we took Jerusalem off the table, now, moved embassy, simply because you moved the location of your embassy, it doesn't mean that Jerusalem is not the open wound of not just Palestinians, of billions of Muslims and free people who support the Palestinian cause across the world.
And while the deal of the century, so-called, may have fallen flat, Kushner is credited with putting together the Abraham Accords in 2020. It's a set of agreements that normalize relations between Israel and several Arab nations, notably United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco. How did he put that deal together?
What had been happening in the years leading to the so-called Abraham Accords in 2020 is that the rift between Iran and several Arab states had been widening. And commercial and security ties between Israel and some Arab states had been deepening. According to the very simple logic of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and both Israel and some Arab countries found an enemy in Iran. What the Trump administration did was to offer a deal of the century, say it didn't work out with the Palestinians, and then go and say, okay, you have the Arab Peace Initiative, which states that Arab states will only normalize with Israel, will only accept Israel after the establishment of Palestinian state. And what Trump and Kushner did was to go and reframe this and say, we're not going to let Arab-Israeli normalization be dependent or hinge on a Palestinian cause. So we're going to go behind the Palestinians' back, go over their head, do our business, have this big signing ceremony between the UAE and Israel at the White House. And then, of course, Bahrain, Morocco were also participants. And we're just going to move on, right? Now, let's talk about what the Abraham Accords achieved. They formalized existing ties between countries that were never at war. What they did not do is that they did not solve the actual hot conflict. And for years after Jared Kushner, the Biden administration took the same approach. They thought, this is the path we need to be pursuing. And then what happens? The whole region explodes.
I mean, it's interesting when we think about Kushner too, like I doubt that his involvement in the Middle East is going to end with this ceasefire deal. I mean, in some ways, it seems like he may just be getting started. We have to remember, Kushner's the guy who said Gaza's coastline could be very valuable waterfront property. He also said that it would be best to move the people of Gaza out and clean it up. Mm-hmm. What are Kushner's plans for the territory now?
In many ways, Jared Kushner represents all the ugly stereotypes about the Western colonizer when it comes to the Palestinians. His comments when he talked about beachfront property, which then translated into Trump talking about the Gaza Riviera. He was out of the government. He wasn't involved in policy at the time. Biden was in office. But his view was that we moved the Palestinians out. And he said, if the Egyptians don't want to take them, we move them into the desert in southern Israel, into the Negev desert. Basically, his vision is like this concentration camp in the desert. We go in, we clean up the place. So you couple that comment with Trump's Gaza Riviera plan, which he expressed back in February, with the comments of Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who talk about encouraging voluntary migration, with Benjamin Netanyahu being reported as saying early in the war that the goal is to thin out the population in Gaza. And that is a Texas-size flashing red light. And for the listeners, Texas is a very large state. Now, the Trump plan, the 20-point Trump plan, states clearly Palestinians are not to be removed from Gaza. Those who want to leave can leave, but they have a right to return. In fact, we will encourage the residents of Gaza to stay in the territory. Is that a good enough reassurance? It's something that cannot be ignored, that it's been put down in writing, and that is a victory for the Palestinian people. But when Jared Kushner is involved, when Trump is going to chair the board of peace that will oversee Gaza, when Tony Blair is involved, when Benjamin Netanyahu is taking a victory lap, we cannot just dismiss these worries and say, oh, they're your imagination. No, there is a major concern that the ceasefire won't last, that the plan is still indeed to ethnically cleanse Gaza and claim its property for condos and Trump towers and beachfront resorts.
Where does this all leave the Palestinians?
That's an excellent question. It appears that once again, just like in the deal of the century, which did not include the Palestinians, just like in Biden's pursuit of broader Israel-Arab state normalization, which overlooked the Palestinians are once again being overlooked, right? To be fair, a lot of Arab states have been trying to center that, right? We heard the Egyptian president Abdel Fattah al-Sisi yesterday say in front of Trump, after praising him and giving him a medal, that peace must be predicated on justice, that Palestinians, like all the peoples of the region, have a right to their own state. But from the American side, it appears that this is not taken on. I will say that Palestinian factions outside of the PA, namely Hamas, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, have put out a joint statement a few days ago saying, we will not accept foreign guardianship over Gaza. We will not relinquish self-rule. The future of Gaza belongs to the Palestinian people.
In a lot of ways, it seems like getting this peace deal signed and all the parties to agree was maybe the easiest part. Like the hardest part is gonna come next, and seeing how they can actually bring peace to the region.
Absolutely, because there are a lot of unknowns. Where do we go from here? Who will rebuild Gaza? Will Israel allow the rebuilding of Gaza? We're days into the ceasefire. We're hearing reports that Israel is reneging on its commitment to open the Rafah crossing, that Israel will reduce the humanitarian aid. The problem is that Israel has been acting like a complete rogue state. So it comes down to who can reign in Israel. And the answer that boils down to is the United States. And when Jared Kushner is involved, there is a lot of reason for concern.
I think we can leave it there. Ali, thank you so much for coming on The Take.
Thank you for having me, Natasha.